go, Jim. He's dead.
Hello, and welcome to Improv Autopsy. I'm your host, Stephen Cadwell. It's hard to live in Orlando without being aware of the entertainment industry. Central Florida has a lot to offer both consumers and practitioners of live entertainment. In this episode, I interview Rob Ward, someone who isn't just aware of what live entertainment can do, but is steeped in it and whose influence is already affecting how companies operate and the possibilities they see. I've known Rob for years. We were contemporaries coming up through SAC Comedy Lab, the exception being that he worked in the office at the time and had a whole other education in both improv and live entertainment that way. It was thanks to him that I was a PA and eventually worked crew for Blue Man Group for a summer. He was the company manager at the time, again, getting a whole other education about live entertainment and the business of shows. He may have been responsible for getting me into 6 Degrees, one of the first improv groups I was a part of in Florida. The more I think about it, the more Rob may be to blame for many of my experiences and the opportunities I was given. Moreover, Rob is one of the most talented MCs I've encountered. He's great with an audience, both as an improviser and as an MC/host/frontman. He delights in the audience delight, which is crucial when you're the host of a show. As well as being an incredible host and improviser, Rob is also a show director and a consultant and is a very hardworking guy. If you're an operation that wants to start offering some live entertainment at your properties or on your cruise ships, Rob is who you want to call. He's one of the most sincere people I know, and you should know him too. Until you get a chance to meet him in person by either hiring him, seeing him at a SAC show, or by attending Truth or Dare Improv with P. Sparkle, either at SAC or wherever it might be playing, where Rob plays the eponymous P. Sparkle, or one of his fringe shows like this year's Mr. Sparkle's Gayborhood, until then, please enjoy Rob Ward's Improv Autopsy. Thank you so much for doing this, by the way.
Hey, my pleasure. It's exciting to just talk to you again, too.
Yeah, ditto. I've been watching your career from afar with equal parts admiration and jealousy.
You know what's funny is I hear that a lot from people about my job, where people will be like, oh, I'm so jealous. It's a dream job. And it really is. But, you know, it's also like, it's my job. I go to work. I do my thing.
Right. Yeah. Well, you have a lot of other fun things kind of on the outskirts of that, too, though. There's the job and then there's some other fun things, too, yeah, that you get involved with.
Yeah, my ADD brain won't let me do just one thing. I'm kind of one of those people. I have to constantly be doing so many different projects at the same time.
What's fun for me in terms of this podcast and you is that like our improv journeys started around the same time.
Yeah.
So just to kind of see where you've gone from there and the things that you've done has really been fun and exciting because you've been a part of some pretty awesome things. But we'll get there if we get there. But before we get there, I guess, the questions are about your origins for improv. So I met you probably in Gen S. Is that right?
Yeah, it must have been like Lab Rats or Gen S. It's because it's around that same time.
Yeah. So we were doing that at the same time. But what was your first encounter with improv, if you remember?
I do remember in detail because there's some fun irony behind it, because my first encounter was when I was in high school and I was part of the Florida State Thespians, the drama troops that would compete. And we were at the state competition and my teacher was like, you are taking an improv class. I'm so tired of you making jokes all day long. You need an outlet. I'm forcing you to take this improv workshop. So I was like, all right, I'll take it. So I went in and there were these kind of younger guys who were just teaching this thing. And it was like 5 minutes in that I was like, oh yeah, this is for me. This is what I like. And what I love about that is I took that class and I loved it. And then I think it was like 7 years later, I taught that workshop at the exact same festival.
Oh, that's awesome.
Which was the really cool, like, full circle moment for me. I was like, oh, wow. And like, my old high school was there with my old drama teacher. I'd showed up to take the workshop.
Did you ask your drama teacher, okay, who is me in this group?
I did, actually. I'm glad you think the same way I do, because I had to know. And she pointed out a kid, and I was like, yeah, that's definitely the me. He's sarcastic. I see what he's doing.
So it wasn't a group from anywhere necessarily that was teaching you improv at the thing? It was just people that liked improv? How do they find those people?
I'm sure they were a group from somewhere. At the time, I didn't know. You know what I mean? I was a high school student, so I didn't pay attention enough. But because when they hired me to come back and do the workshop, although they didn't hire me through SAC when they hired me, they just called because someone knew someone. And I had been teaching improv workshops at the district level, and then someone recommended me at the state level, so they called and reached out.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
So it clicked for you right away, you're saying?
Yeah, it took like 5 minutes into that workshop before I was like, oh, like it was an instant click for me. I don't mean it clicked as in I was good at it, but it clicked as in, oh, I want to learn more about this.
Yeah.
I feel like this is something I should be doing.
And where did you go from there? What was your then inroad?
So I took that workshop and I was then like kind of obsessed with improv, but there were no opportunities to do it, right? I was down in South Florida. There were no improv theaters. There was like one small improv troupe, so I would always go watch their shows in a coffee shop somewhere. I don't even remember their name. And I'm sure if I saw it today, I'd be like, oh, that's some terrible improv. But at the time it was like great coffee shop improv for my 17-year-old brain. And I was, of course, like most improvisers, obsessed with Whose Line Is It Anyway?
Yeah.
So I would watch that over and over again. But then when I came up to Orlando, I came here to go to college, and I went to UCF, and I was a theater major. And there was one improv class that they offered, but it wasn't fun. I took the class, and I was like, I don't love this. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe this isn't the thing for me. So I kind of dropped out of it for a while. And then, ironically, the way I found SAC Comedy Lab was I got a speeding ticket. And at that time, SAC taught the comedy traffic school.
Yep.
So I took the comedy traffic school course, and then they were like, oh, and you should come. When you did the course, they gave you free tickets to go see a show at SAC. So I went and saw it, and I still remember I saw Charles Fryerman in the show, who is just, oh, he was on your first one, right? Wasn't he the first person you interviewed?
Second.
Oh, okay, first or second. But yeah, I saw Charles in a show, and I was like, that guy is wild. I want to be like him. He's funny. And so I went and talked to him afterwards, and he was the one who told me, he's like, oh, I teach classes here. You should take my class. So he invited me to try out his class. So I took the first class, like as an audit, and then I was like, yeah, I have to do this. So then the next semester, I took it with him as my teacher, and that was where I got started.
Awesome. Traffic school got you to SAC Comedy Lab. Do you remember was there anything particular about the class at UCF that made it not fun, or it just in general?
Yeah, they weren't really focused on short form comedy. It was just like improv technique. The first day, just like we in all of our improv classes, how we teach people don't try to be funny. They did the same thing, but they really meant it. Like, don't be funny at all. And in fact, if you veered into comedy, the teacher would be like, no, you're veering away from what's real. So I think it was more of like improv for actors.
Yeah.
Than it was like comedic improv, if that makes sense.
Yeah. That's strange. My first introduction or my first class was at college as well, and it wasn't improv as comedy. It was improv as theater, but we weren't told to stay away from comedy at all. That seems like an artificial constraint, because I feel like improv in general is usually funny because it's improv.
Absolutely, because you're being human, you're being real, and nothing's funnier than the human condition, right?
Yeah. So to put that constraint on it, yeah, that would rob some of the joy.
Yeah, it made it like actually very hard to just be, right? Because a lot of when you're doing improv are comedic instincts that come out, and it made it so tough. And I was like, I don't like this.
I was in a group in Chicago for a little bit of time. We did an improvised psychological thriller, and the goal was to be as much of a psychological thriller as possible without comedy, but
wow.
I don't know if he succeeded there. I talked with Will Minen. He was in that group as well, and he talks about how he doesn't think you should try serious improv.
I've seen it work, but I've seen it work in very specific situations, right? Not for entertainment value, but I've seen it work in those kind of simulation trainings that they do, like they do medical simulation training and like army simulation training with improvisers who are playing real, but that's not for entertainment value, right? It's for learning.
Right. Well, and I guess another aspect of it would be immersive experiences where you're improvising in character as a character, and if that character is serious, then those can be for entertainment purposes, but it's not really like show situation.
That's true. If you think of like Sleep No More, there's elements to that show that are highly scripted, but there's also elements to that show that are a little looser and that are based on how the audience reacts, but it's not a comedic show at all. It is very dark.
Yeah. Okay, so fast forward then a little bit back to you took Charles' class, and that was your inroad into SAC?
That was my inroad. And in my level 1 class were Jamie Black and Jose Rodriguez. So people that I still talk to today and still do improv with today, which I think is wild.
Yeah. And that must have been around the same time. I think Jose maybe was, so you just missed me by one class session, I think, because I think Jose was in the group going in front of me. So I would have been in the next Charles class.
Yeah, because I
believe.
Jose and I were just talking about this recently, because we were like, I think Jose and I did 1 and 2 together, and then he repeated 2, which is where he met you. or maybe he repeated 3, which is where
Yeah.
he met you. But we were just talking about how our little there's a group of us that all kind of came in at the same time. And still sometimes when it comes to SAC, it's, weird that I'm like, oh, we're the senior members now, but we were the babies. I still think of us as like,
Yeah.
you're all the new kids. And I was like, no, we're the people who actually are making decisions for that company sometimes. That just still always feels weird to me.
Agreed. At what point in all of that did you get connected to 6 Degrees, or were you one of the founding members?
I was not one of the founding members. So 6 Degrees, there was a handful of people who were in lab rats. And I wasn't a lab rat yet. I was still in classes. But Steve Grogan was one of the lab rats at the time. And he was part of 6 Degrees. But I actually was in classes with his wife, Idanya. So that I was like one of the few people who met his wife before him. Well, his wife now. She wasn't his wife then. She was his girlfriend at that time. But she was like, oh, you need to meet my boyfriend, Steve. He's a lab rat. He's part of this group. So she introduced me there. And then she invited me to their house to do like a 6 Degrees thing, right? Where we were just playing through that actual format that Simon had created, which was the 6 Degrees format. It was a long form. And so I didn't really even know anybody in that group when I was invited in. I only knew Idanya. So I was so nervous to work with them. And then we started playing together. And again, we didn't have a gig. We didn't have anything. It was living room improv just for practice. But I immediately felt like I clicked with several of the members of the group, that we just immediately had like oh, you're weird in a way that works with my weird. And so I was really enjoying playing with them. And so I just kept playing with them regularly until suddenly I was like part of the group. And it was like, I still remember it was probably 4 or 5 months into just practicing with them that they all had this meeting, and it felt like a fraternity almost, where they were like, we want to invite you to become an official member of 6 Degrees. And in my head, I was like, am I not an official member of 6 Degrees yet? Sure, yes, I'll do it.
Nice. Did you ever actually perform the long form anywhere? Because by the time I got to 6 Degrees, I don't think I ever even learned it.
Yeah, I mean, and we did. That's how we started out, because we would do the long form in someone's living room once a week. And then eventually we got a regular gig at Austin's Coffee and Film. And we started out by doing like 2 or 3 short form games. And then we would do the 6 Degrees long form. And then we found that we were having more and more fun doing the short form together. And we're really working hard at making the long form work for an audience.
Yeah.
And we were like, that's where we're losing them, is when we're doing the long form. So we slowly moved away from doing that long form at all. So even though we were 6 Degrees, we didn't really do the 6 Degrees long form anymore.
Right. I may have seen it once.
It was an interesting long form too. Like the format was like each one of us just started as a character. Like you just turn around and give an opening line as a character. And then the audience picked where we went in the lineup 1 through 6. And then the goal was, by the end of the long form, 1 had to meet 6, but 1 only knew 2, 2 only knew 1 and 3, 3 only knew like 2 and 4. And so you had to be like introduced through the story. It was an intriguing long form, but I think like so many long forms, there's a challenge in making it palatable for an audience that I don't think we ever cracked.
Yeah, that does sound like fun.
It was silly fun, really fun and wild when we were doing it in the living room. But, I still personally feel like long form is such an art form that I love, but it really is hard to get an audience's buy-in sometimes.
Yeah, when when we went to our first Gainesville Improv Festival, we created our own form because, I'm going to have to talk to Simon at some point. I don't know what his background was in terms of long form improv or knowing it, but for us, with zero background, we were just kind of, flailing around in the dark to create something because it's something we wanted to do.
Yeah.
And we created a form, and it was called Transit. And the problem was the best version of that show happened in a living room. And it was never going to get any better than that. And we took it to the festival anyway, and we felt terrible afterward. Like, oh, that was just a terrible show. But they still let us back the next year, so that was good.
So that's good. It couldn't have been as bad as it felt in your mind. Then.
Yeah.
But yeah, 6 Degrees was the same way. I felt like we did some amazing work in the living room, and it all worked. So we were like, yeah, this works. It makes sense. And then we'd get it out in front of an audience and be like, no, now we're missing it. Now doesn't have that same energy and flow that it had in the living room, right? Maybe people were getting in their heads, or maybe just it seemed funny to us but did not feel funny to other people watching. which is very common. So
Yeah. When did the 6 degrees with the clap and the degree on your hand, when did that come into play?
I still remember that vividly. So it was just the weirdest thing. It happened as a joke. We had our regular Austin's gig at that point, but we would also still do a once a week meetup in the living room of someone's house. And we were just like, we need a thing that's our thing so that it feels like 6 degrees. And we were like, like when something goes to a commercial, like Spider-Man has like a and a little Spider-Man logo that goes towards the screen. We're like, we need one of those. And we used to play a game with each other at 6 degrees where, that game where like, if you look at someone's hand and then they get to punch you in the shoulder.
Yes.
That you play as kids. It was like that kind of thing, but it would be, you took your finger and you pointed at your palm. And if you got someone to look at your finger pointing at your palm, then nothing happened. We didn't punch each other. We just all laughed. But it was like, you got me. And that was our thing. So because that was the thing that we were all doing, then one day someone drew a little like circle and they were like, look, it's the degree because you have 5 fingers and then you put the 6th one there and it's 6 degrees. And then we said as a joke, what if we did that to end the scene? Because then we're giving everyone the palm game that we play. And then as a joke, we would like, okay, so we're all just going to clap, point at your palm and say 6 degrees. And that was the whole thing. But in the first show, that back where we did that, we went clap, point at the palm, 6 degrees. And like 3 audience members at the same time out loud went, what the hell? So then somehow we just incorporated that then as the tradition, as we were supposed to go clap 6 degrees. And then the audience would all yell, what the hell, back at us. So weird. Such a strange thing. But it did create this like bonding moment between the audience and us.
Yeah. That
really helped to create this like feeling that we had, where we had a lot of regulars towards the end of our, as we grew, maybe not towards the end, but towards the peak. We had a pretty loyal audience that came back again and again. And I think things like that really made them feel connected to us and into the story of improv.
Yeah.
And I always say 6 degrees kind of formed a lot of how I do improv today, really, because that was the first group I was in where everything was personality based.
Yeah.
Like we really played into what our personality in the show was, which now that is something I teach often. When I'm teaching students at SAC, I teach now a new advanced class that we do, which is about improv for the stage. And that's one of the things I always say. I was like, people always ask me how you get into the ensemble. And I was like, I don't have a straight answer. Do this, this, and this, and you'll be in the ensemble. And I was like, but the big thing is you have to be a personality that the audience connects to, right? When you see a good improv show, you see people. You're not seeing improv machines. You're seeing the human beings behind them.
Yeah.
And 6 degrees is really where I learned that.
There are a couple things. So first of all, in my mind, whenever I think of the clap and the pointing at the palm, it's you that I see doing that for whatever reason. I don't know why. But when you mention the what the hell bit, it's Kenny Jardine that I hear saying that.
100% with his monotone, like, what the hell? Like, just that.
Yeah.
Like a Simpsons character. Yeah.
And I'd forgotten that aspect of it. And then when you said that, then his voice was ringing loud and clear in my head. The thing that's cool about that, because it is, in terms of watching that show, it wouldn't make sense necessarily in terms of being able to make it connect to anything. But I think as the rationale that you gave in terms of like the going to the commercial break or ending a scene, especially in a place like Austin's where we didn't have blackouts and there were a lot of things that we didn't have that you would maybe have on a stage, it was great punctuation for the show.
Absolutely, right? It took the place of that end scene that you have to do if you don't have a blackout available to you.
Yeah, and it was unique. It was something that 6 Degrees came up with, and it was only done by 6 Degrees, and it served a purpose. And that was a lot of fun. I'd never really thought about what you're talking about with personalities, but you were definitely right. And maybe, I don't know if everyone doing it in a coffee shop experiences that necessity to the bar prov and improv in coffee shops is quite a bit different than if you're in an improv theater where everyone's there for theater. You kind of have to vie for attention a little bit more in some of those other places.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. And we used to open the show like kind of by giving into our stereotypes. I was the gay one. Charlie was the virgin. James was the slut, which none of this is even like, I mean, she's not, but that was the character that she played in the show. That was how she presented herself. We had Gina was kind of the ditzy one. And so we all kind of presented our personalities in that way, or at least what personalities we decided we were for the concept of the show.
Yeah. I feel like whether people completely realize it or not. And I've been asking, and this will be a question later when I ask about that kind of thing, but people, whenever you're on stage, you're playing a version of yourself or a version of someone else, but you can never really just be relaxed you when you're on stage. It's the atmosphere doesn't really lend itself to that. So it's a good proving ground for that kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. That's what I always tell my students. Yeah, you have to learn how to amplify your personality, right? How to put it out there. Because I always say if I were the same level of energy and intensity in real life all the time as I was when I was on stage, none of my friends would want to hang out with me because that would be exhausting, right?
Yeah. All right, so you're doing 6 degrees and you're in one of the student levels or one and then the other at SAC. Is improv affecting your life in any other ways around this time?
Absolutely it was. Well, also funny enough, I ended up throughout that process working at SAC Comedy Lab.
Oh, right.
And I was one of only 2 full-time employees for SAC at that time. So I did what is now like 6 people's jobs at SAC. But at the time when we were just this smaller company, I was completely unqualified to do it all. But there I was like the bookkeeper, the house manager, just this whole like array of just tasks that I would take on at SAC. And that was very strange because it was like, here I was a student there too, not even like an ensemble member, but I would also be having to teach our ensemble member how to get their paychecks or how to do those kind of things. But it was great because it left me fully immersed in that world. So it was 100% part of my job to experience the shows. And so it really affected like improv becoming such a major part of my life because it was what I did for 8 hours a day. And then I would do lab rats and then I would do 6 degrees. So I really was in that world of just constant improv.
Yeah. And when did you start hosting? Because that added a couple more hours to that as well.
Yeah. And then hosting is really where I made my into the ensemble because, and I still remember this, I wanted to host from the beginning and I was starting to host in lab rats. And I think I was in Next Gen at that time. I was starting to host in Next Gen because Lyle was like, I feel like you have a good host energy. And I was like, I've been saying that, but nobody listens. And I would always try to convince Dave, our artistic director, to let me host. And he would always say, no. I don't think you should be doing that. I don't think that's right. You need to focus on your job here during the day. And I still remember this. There was a day where 2 people called in sick. There was like a flu going around. And we didn't have a host and we lost 2 players. We were down to like 2 teams that would have like 1-1 with a floater and still no host. And we were like at that level. And I was on the phone with Dave Russell and he was like, well, there's got to be some other option. I was like, Dave, I'm just going to go out and host the show. And he's like, no, there's got to be something else we can do. And I was like, I'm just going to host. And he was like, no, I don't want you to do that. And I was like, well, the show starts in 20 minutes, so either you get here or I'm going to be hosting the show. And I kind of hung up, and I just renegade, kind of went out there to the cast, and I was like, you guys, I'm going to host tonight. And they were like, all right, great. So, and then I went out and I hosted, and it was like a show, too, that had like some of the senior members of SAC at that time, too. It was like Jay Hopkins, who had been at SAC forever, and like a couple other people who had just been there for a long time. And Brendan Jennings, if you remember him, was in that show.
Yeah. And
he was kind of also one of like the people that Dave, our artistic director, really trusted. So I hosted the show, and afterwards they all were like, you were really great. That was a really solid hosting show. And I was like, don't tell me. Will you tell Dave? Please call him tonight and tell him that it was good. So then the next day when I saw Dave, he was like, I didn't want you hosting, but it seems like it might be something that you're good at. So I guess we'll put you on the schedule to host. Like, so unhappy about it. And I was like, all right, great, thanks. So then I got to host a little bit more regularly. And that was really where I think I grew the most as an improviser, was by hosting the shows. I was kind of in the ensemble with the ensemble, you know, with the pros.
Yeah.
And so really learning from them on a day-to-day basis and sitting in on every post and all of those things too. So that really helped me grow.
Yeah, and really exercising the muscles you're talking about developing in 6 degrees in terms of the stage persona.
Absolutely. Because in 6 degrees, I hosted a lot because I just found that I enjoyed doing that.
When I think about hosts, especially for like Amelia Street, I remember you, I remember Bob, and I remember the guy that was, I think I remember hearing that he was Benji and Dinger's youth pastor perhaps at one point. I can't remember his name. Dan Buck, is that?
Yes, Dan Buck. That was it.
Okay. I did remember his name.
Yeah, he came in like for, I think, a couple of years, and then I don't know where he went after that. But yeah, he was there for a while.
Yeah.
Because at Amelia Street, it really did hit that point where it was just a couple of us that were hosting.
And then Gina started at one point, too. I remember Gina hosting. Maybe she started before you. I don't know.
Yeah, Gina jumped in, and she's still going, which is great.
Yeah. Do you host anything other than your own show now?
I've done some MC work at various gigs. I did some cruise line work. And then actually last year, I was teaching hosts for MSC Cruises as they're expanding their American ship base. I was helping them to recruit and then train American hosts for all their onboard activities, their sail away shows and all those things that they do.
Yeah, yeah.
Which was great to get to be kind of in a different hosting arena.
Yeah, I bet. This is also then what I remember about you as host for a SAC show, because everyone's way different, but that's not a bad thing. It's part of you work yourself into the show in different ways, and so everyone does that in different ways. But the thing that some people struggle a lot with, especially the warm up, or I don't know if struggle is the right word, but that can be when you're getting everybody on board and you're really sort of preparing them for what they're about to see as a host, and you're so even then, like, I don't remember you not being good at bringing the audience and getting them onto your side and getting them ready. Like, I remember being backstage thinking, Rob could do this the entire time and no one would miss us because he's killing it out there just doing his stuff.
And that was actually, I had to learn how to do a little bit less at the top of the show because I just genuinely, the first few times I hosted, it just also clicked for me that I was like, oh, I really love this one-on-one I have with the audience. When we're doing our improv scenes, I have my improv partner, but in this case, the audience is my improv scene partner. And because every audience is so different, they're such an unknown that it's always going to be an adventure going out there and interacting with them. So I really loved that. And when I think back to when I was first hosting, I think I did every joke, every bit that you could do, and the players would just be back there like, are we ever coming out? I did have to learn as like hosting a short form improv show how to go, okay, once I have them, now let me bring out the players and help to create that connection so that it's not all about me. But I think in the early stages, I was definitely like luxuriating in that moment for a long time. And what's funny is now I host the Truth or Dare with P. Sparkle show that we've been doing for almost 10 years at SAC, which is wild. But in hosting that show, it is like I spend about 20 minutes just me out in the audience, talking to the audience and connecting with the audience before I ever bring out the players. But that's the format of that show.
Yeah, that's a very personality-driven show, right?
Yeah, that show is very personality-driven. And it's our uncensored, kind of dirty, wild party show. So I always say, like, my job in the beginning is to really set up that this is a party and the whole audience is guests at the party. None of us are more important than the other. So we're all just kind of friends. So I mess with the audience too, but it's always in like gentle, the way your friend would make fun of you. Yeah. Not like, hey, you should feel bad about yourself, but just like you tease, like we're friends.
Yeah. I just talked with Dave a little while ago, and just kind of the origins of SAC in the Ren Fair thing, and how much at SAC especially, the interaction with the audience, how important that is. And I really feel like it's so surprising to me that he was so reticent to let you host, because as a host, I feel like you really embody so much of what they had been doing in the Ren Fairs that it's ironic that he was preventing you from doing that.
Well, it was also because I worked at SAC in the office full time. He was our managing director. So he always said he didn't want me in shows. He just didn't want that. Like, he wanted me to focus on the day-to-day job. And I was like, I'm never just going to do that. I'm here because I wanted to perform.
Yeah.
I didn't come here because I wanted to do the books. That just kind of happened. But yeah, and ironically, I just think this is such a fun story about how everything comes full circle. I have a accurate memory of me at 9 years old going to Walt Disney World with my family, because we lived in South Florida. We came up here and we went to Walt Disney World and we saw one of the trunk shows, and I got pulled up on stage, but I loved the way the performers in that interacted with the audience. And that's definitely another route for me, because I remember just being there and watching that and going, this is amazing. Even at 9 years old, I thought it was the coolest thing ever. And so we took a picture of me with the cast. And then years later, I'm working at SAC and I go home and I visit my family, and we're flipping through like an old photo album. And there's the picture of 9-year-old me. And I'm standing between Dave Russell and Morgan Russell. They were the two actors in the show. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's so wild. They were part of my route, and now I work with them.
Yeah. Oh, that's amazing. And it sounds like it really did affect you when you gravitate toward that interaction with the audience and the personality stuff, because I'm sure the trunk show, I never got to experience those, but that had to have been a huge part of that, right?
Oh yeah, I mean, it was all that. It was like stand in the center of one of the like pavilions at Epcot and gather a crowd out of nothing. I'm pulling things out of the trunk and just creating this full story, but it was always kind of town crier almost as they were performing, where they're screaming out at the crowd and trying to pull them in.
Yeah.
Which was very Ren Fair style.
Yeah. When I worked at Universal, and not as much when I was at Disney because I did push for a little while, so I wasn't supposed to be seen.
Oh,
but
yes.
when at Universal doing some of the characters, I have wondered, a lot of people are going to have pictures of me in their family albums, and I just found that amusing.
Right. That's the most interesting thing about theme park world.
Yeah. That you end up on who knows where in photos and stuff. But I love that was Dave and Morgan in your photo, and that was another. You've come full circle twice now.
I know there's so many things in my kind of improv career that have just come full circle at some point, which always is fun to me. And also the fact that I now work for Disney as a show director. And one of the things I did a few years ago was create a trunk show that we did for a client. And it's just, again, all those kind of like, the world that just goes around and comes back around.
How do you find improv helpful in direction, and how do you use your improv background in your directing?
Well, I will say I use improv as a director for myself all the time. And I think it's actually one of the things that made my career really help take off in the world of show direction, because when you're doing big box entertainment, everything's going to go differently than the way you plan. There's always going to be budget cuts. There's going to be, we can't use this space. And I think being in that world of improv and being in that world of yes and made me such a flexible director that I'd go in, and some directors go in and here's the plan. And if something deviates from it, it now is creating tension and a problem. Whereas I'm usually like, okay, something's deviated. Let's work with this. So how are we going to make this work? And I think it's one of the things that has helped grow my career, because I've been a very adaptable person in that world and have been able to go, okay, well, if we have to move this show from this stage to this stage, how do we now lean into what's great about this stage, where we are right now, and take that and create that storyline and make it go somewhere different that we weren't ready to go, but we're now on this new journey. And so I use those kind of techniques all the time when I'm working. So I never really go in like, this is what must happen today and we must finish it this way. I've always had kind of a, well, let's see what happens. And so even in directing, very often with actors, I'll also go, let's just do one that nothing's going to come of this, right? Let's just have you do a run of this that it's unserious. Just go and make some choices. And very often in doing that, we discover things that make their way into shows and make their way into characters that just came out of, let's just do a run where we just mess around. We just play.
Yeah, that's awesome. So what I'm hearing from the beginning part of that is that you've never been a director that was like, that picks up and leaves and quits at the first sign of any sort of adversity. You roll with the punches, which you've, even the little bit of experience I've had in the theme parks, I know that you have to be able to do that or you're not going to cut it.
Oh, yeah. There are, you say roll with the punches, and there are a lot of punches when you're working in that industry.
Yeah, because it can be anything.
For sure. Anything and everything that can go wrong or go just differently than you planned happens in those spaces, especially even once shows open, because you're entertaining audiences from all over the world who are not necessarily trained in how to experience theater. They're going to a theme park. They know rides. But now here we give you this little slice of entertainment. And how does each audience react will always be different. I've seen some of the most wild things you can imagine, right, from theme park audiences.
Yeah. Well, do you recall anything from your improv experience? Has anything cemented itself in your mind because it went terribly wrong?
It's funny. I was thinking about that because that's the basis of this podcast. And I was trying to think about it because I was like, obviously I've done hundreds of scenes that have all gone wrong over the years. But one that popped into my head recently that I just thought was, and really it's more of a funny memory to me than it is a painful one.
That's good.
Yeah, I loved it. It was in a show at SAC. And I was on stage with Jamie Black, and I introduced the game to the audience. The host said, all right, Rob, you're going to do an ABC scene. So I was like, oh, great. Jamie and I are going to do this ABC scene where every line of dialogue is going to start with the next consecutive letter of the alphabet. And we'll try to go all the way through the alphabet, starting at A, ending on Z, all that stuff. We get the suggestion, and it's library. And the scene opens, and I reach up, and I grab a book off the shelf. I'm so proud of my object work as I'm doing this. And then Jamie walks into the scene and she's like, Albert, you found the book we're looking for. And I was like, yes, it's right here. And the audience laughed. And I was like, I don't know why they're laughing. Weird. I didn't say anything that funny. And then Jamie was like, but I thought it was missing. And I said, so did I. But I've been looking, and I couldn't figure out why the audience was laughing. And we went all the way through the letter M of Jamie playing the game and me completely forgetting to play ABC after I just set it up a moment before. And I didn't catch on. And I just thought Jamie is playing the weirdest character because every sentence she says starts with like, Dan said not to get them. And I was like, why does she keep hitting those first words? And I'm trying to figure all this out while we're doing the scene. And then we were all the way at the letter M. And all of a sudden, I just looked straight at the audience and went, oh my God, we're doing an ABC scene. And the lights blacked out. And the audience like went wild. And like, it was such a pure, wonderful failure that I loved every second of it afterwards because the audience gave it all 5s for the scene. And it was just such a joyful failure.
Yeah. Well, and that's really the crux of what I want to talk about in these podcasts as well, is the failures that we can laugh about, not the ones that still are a little tender, unless people really want to talk about them. But the thing I love about that,
right,
the story you just told as well, is what you were talking about earlier when we were discussing, maybe it was even the class at UCF, but when you were talking about being real and authentic, because had you been playing that and not having actually forgotten what you had just said, you probably wouldn't have gotten 5s, but because it was such a genuine and real moment. And that to me is the magic of improv, is we're seeing it as it happens, the reality of it. And they knew in that moment that you'd forgotten despite you just said it, and were delighting in what was happening.
Absolutely. It was like the audience was playing a game of when is Rob going to realize he's an idiot, right? As we were doing this, because I was just really into the scene and completely forgot the game. So I was like, oh, what a fun scene we're doing. Jamie's a little weird, but whatever. And she was being so good, not getting angry at all, but just trying to lead me into playing the game without ever getting frustrated. Like, she got frustrated, like cartoony frustrated. But again, I thought, oh, how weird that her character is getting angry right now. We're not really doing anything that would make her angry. And it was that genuine moment when I realized that I hadn't been playing the game, that I just genuinely blurted out loud, oh my God, we're playing ABC, right? Because it completely hit me by surprise. And we were like deep into the scene at that point.
Yeah, I love it.
Yeah, I actually teach some of my students about that recently, because I was like, that was just such a wonderful failure. And, I always use that to teach the lesson of how improv isn't about perfection. Nobody's going to an improv show because they want to see us be perfect. In fact, sometimes they love when we screw up.
Yeah, and the live aspect of it, that, like I said, being there in the moment, I don't think SNL would still be around if that was not live, because there's danger in being live.
Right.
That's part of what makes it so great and so fun to watch, and improv is the same way.
Yeah, I always said the thing that would break my heart would be if after a show the audience was like, oh, that show was so safe and comfortable.
Yeah.
That's how I would know we failed. It should feel dangerous. It should feel scary.
Yeah, the audience should gasp at some point because they think something might happen. And it might. It actually might.
And it might. You might forget to play the game that you just set up with the audience.
Do you remember anything from any of the times that you were hosting where there was any weird interactions with the audience that stick in your mind, or any things that you had to subvert or divert?
One just happened, it was like 2 months ago, where I was doing a P. Sparkle show. So again, I'm P. Sparkle, so I'm in the giant wig and I wear these giant boots and it's this larger than life character. And again, the whole top of that show is me just messing with the crowd. I always mess with people who are not like smiling, who look like they're not having fun. Because I'm like, oh, this person who's so serious right now. And especially because it is an uncensored adults only show, sometimes people who come to SAC, where we do all family friendly theater, don't always understand what they've bought tickets to. So we've had that a few times where I'm like, I could see what's happening here. They did not know what kind of show they were seeing.
Yeah.
So I'll usually mess with those people too, to bring them into it, right? I'll be like, oh, you didn't know what you were seeing, did you? Well, too late, you already paid, silly things like that. A lot of fun. But there was a girl who was like right in like the third or fourth row and just looked so unhappy and was not making eye contact with me at all. So when I walked up, I walked right up to her in that row and I was like, and what's going on here? It seems like you're trying to avoid me. And she turned around, looked me in the eyes, and I knew in that moment that it was like, oh, this is a serious thing. And she said, I'm just really overstimulated. This is too much for me. And like her whole body was shaking as she said it, right? And that's a tough moment because I have the whole audience now looking at her, which I'm sure is now more overstimulating. And I don't want to be a person who puts her through something that is unpleasant.
Yeah.
I don't want her to walk away and go, that guy made me feel. But that show, the Truth or Dare show, is just full of stimulus in the beginning. So yes, if you were someone that bothers, that would be overstimulating, and I could see it. So in the moment, I had like, that momentary moment of panic.
Yeah.
And how do I get out of this? And then luckily, I thought more about kind of some management training that I had done over the years and how to just hear someone and meet them where they are. So I was like, that's completely okay. And I just kind of backed off a little bit and I was like, and I understand. that this show is a little overstimulating. So you know what? You do you. I'm going to tell you, you're sitting very close to the stage right now. And this is an overstimulating zone. And I was like, so you might be more comfortable sitting towards the back. Would you like to do that? And she actually said yes. And she got up and walked to the back and took a seat in the back row. And then we just kind of moved on. But it was one of those moments where I was like, oh, this could have gotten so dicey.
Yeah. I mean, kudos. I mean, I think it speaks to your alacrity as a host and a performer. That in that moment, it wasn't still all about you and the show, that you were able to, like you said, meet halfway and be like, okay, let's get this taken care of. And maybe that's part of the theme park background as well, because there's all kinds of stuff happens there.
That is true.
Yeah. Oh, that would have been tough. I would have been sweating bullets.
Yeah, and I will say, my friends who were in the audience were like, yeah, you were so calm. And I was like, oh, really? Because inside I was a volcano erupting in that moment. Like I was in a full mental panic, but I was like, how do I make this moment work? How do I make it? And I was like, no, I can't make fun of this, because then it's going to feel like I'm making fun of a person who's going through something bad. So I can't really so I was just had so many thoughts going through my head. And I was like, you know what? The great thing about an improv show is that we're humans. So let's be human. Okay, great. Here's the human moment for you, is that you're in this moment. Let's find a human solution and try to just move on and just, hey, we're all people and we're all going through this together. But yeah, man, internally, I was freaking out.
Yeah.
I also had one time, if you remember the old SAC shows, we used to do the pink shoe.
Yes.
Where we would throw the pink shoe and the whole audience would stand up and sing hallelujah and raise their hands. And I always would set it up. I'm like, all right, once I throw the pink shoe, everyone in the theater is going to leap out of their seats and you're going to raise your hands to the heavens. And there was a guy in the front row, and it's going to sound like I'm making this up. I completely am not. He was in a wheelchair and he had 2 hooks for hands. So both of his hands were hooks. And he had a great sense of humor. So I said, you're going to raise your hands in the air. And then he looked me dead in the eye and said out loud for the whole audience, he's like, what if you don't have hands? And he raised his 2 hooks in the air. And I just said, you know what, sir? Raise what you got. Let's make it a moment. But again, it came across smooth. But internally, I was like, oh, my God, what do I do? What do I say to that? I don't know.
Do you remember, I don't know if this was the same person or not, because it seems to have the same temperament, but there was someone who had the prosthesis and at one point threw their leg onto the stage?
I do remember that in great detail. I wasn't in that show. I happened to just be in the audience for that show. But I do remember it because we were doing a Christmas Carol kind of parody. And at the end, someone was like, Tiny Tim, I guess you don't get a leg this year. And the guy in the front detached his prosthetic and said, you can have mine, and held it up in the air. And if I remember correctly, the host just ended the show right there, because they were like, nothing is going to be funnier than that moment. The show's over. This person is the winner. And that's what we're doing tonight. Because they were like, nothing's going to be funnier than this person detaching their prosthetic leg and raising it in the air at us.
Wow. Yeah, I remember that happening, but maybe I might just remember it being talked about, because I don't remember seeing it, and that's glorious.
Yeah, it was a lab rat show, too. It wasn't even like an ensemble show. And there was another one where we were doing like a Snow White thing, and there was a little person in the front row, and they jumped up on stage and were like, the dwarf is here. And again, it's like, because they chose to make that moment so real. It was another one of those times where you could not get the show back on track after that.
Yeah. I would, I can only imagine. Oh. Did you ever have to eject anyone from the audience?
Oh, absolutely. There was a show, I still remember this, I was hosting the show, but it was also while I was the manager at SAC at the time. And so I'm hosting the show, but we had this group in the audience that were just a group of drunk frat guys who were just loud and obnoxious and shouting throughout the show and just very drunk. And it was one of those times where you could tell the whole audience hated them.
Yeah.
Because they were just hurting everyone's enjoyment of the show.
Yeah.
And we went back at intermission. We had talked to the house manager and said maybe they should leave. And the house manager was like, I'm just going to keep my eye on them, but I don't want to kick them out yet. But they were supposed to be the slice of life. They had purchased the slice of life in the show.
Oh.
Like, we were talking backstage at the cast, and I was like, I can't bring them up on stage. The audience is going to be so angry if we bring these people up on the stage. And so I came up with a plan, because also I was the bookkeeper of SAC at the time. So I wrote them a check for the amount of their slice of life that they had purchased. We came out, and I was doing the host announcements, and they were loud throughout all the host announcements. I was like, also, this is the time where normally we would bring someone up on stage and create a day in their life as a musical. However, that person was supposed to be this person here in the second row, and the audience booed in that moment. And I said, but we have all decided that we're not going to do that. So, sir, I have a check for your refund, and I'd like to ask you to leave. And the guy got up and like kind of took a step in my face. But in that moment, I wasn't really worried because I'm like, well, I have 250 witnesses
Right.
around and a bunch of players who are all like right behind me. So I was like, all right, if this was on the street, I might have gotten a little nervous. But in that moment, I was like, okay, I think we're okay. And then he just kind of was like, oh man, shouted a few curses. And then he and his friends stormed out. But the audience cheered as they left.
That is amazing. And as a host now, I wish I always had the power to refund people. Although I don't think I ever had slice people that anyone knew they were going to hate beforehand.
Right. That was the first time I'd ever experienced that, where I was like, oh man, we're going to bring this person up on stage and they're going to hate this because they already hate this person.
There have been times when we were bringing them down to the stage and I knew it then, but never that early in the show.
Right. Never ahead of time.
Yeah.
Yeah. Definitely there's been times where you call out and you're like, oh no, it's that person. Oh man.
You ask the first question and the response you get is like, well, uphill, here we go.
Oh yeah. We just had one of those like a week ago where we had this group of firemen who it was like the chief's birthday, but they had had many cocktails before they got there.
Yeah.
And the guy, when we brought him up on stage, clearly just so uncomfortable being on stage that he made it very uncomfortable for all of us.
Yeah.
Like the first thing is I handed him the microphone and he literally threw it onto the ground.
Oh.
And so, you know, now the way we do the slices, we interview them on stage. And so I'm trying to interview him, but everything is combative and adversarial. So at one point I just kind of made the executive decision in that moment of I was like, all right, well, we're just going to make it up. We're going to wing a day in your life, what we think it would be. So here we go. And we just kind of jumped in. But I was like, yeah, I can't do this interview anymore because he's going to fight.
And you say he was the chief?
And he was like a fire chief. Yes, I don't know like what station, but I was like, oh man, I hope we never have an emergency and that guy shows up.
I can only imagine the hell he put the rest of the firehouse through if he disliked being on stage that much. Don't you ever do that to me again.
That's what surprised me. I was like, doesn't he have to talk to this whole group? But yeah, and you could tell that they were all friends because they worked together day in and day out. So they were like cheering for him. But I was also like, this man is actually actively uncomfortable in this moment too. And drunk, which is a terrible combination.
Yeah. I feel like with the frat guy, like that could have been a better memory for them. Like whatever story they've created about that could be a better story than the one they would have had if they would have stayed for the slice. And I wonder like what the story is that the fire chief tells about that experience. Maybe he's terribly embarrassed because when he gets drunk, he just gets kind of depressed and disgruntled.
Right. Or do they tell that story like a really funny one? Like they brought me up on stage and didn't even want to talk to me. Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or where the frat guy's like, yeah, they threw us out.
I threw the mic in his face.
Yeah, they loved it. Oh, everybody loved it. They thought it was so funny.
After we left, we heard them cheering.
Exactly. They loved it. We were so good. You know, and I always say that, like, I really try to give audience members the benefit of the doubt because what we're doing in improv is so different than what a lot of people are used to.
Yeah.
And I always try to go into it with, hey, they just don't know how to play. So the first few times they're being a little off kilter of what we want them to be. I was like, it's just because they haven't figured out how to play correctly. So I feel like we can train them. But then after like a few times of training them, you're like, oh no, they just suck. Okay.
Well, and that's why I feel like the host role is so important is because you're out there to get ahead of it, to cue people into it, especially those that have never been there before. Like, this is different. We're going to talk to you. We can see you. It's going to be a little more interactive. Right. You can't just sit there and be anonymous like you can for other things potentially.
Yeah, I think that's 100% the host's role is to really set that expectation and set the like, hey, this is going to be different than if you go see a Broadway show. Most Broadway shows anyway, where you're supposed to sit down and observe. In this case, you're doing more than that, but also here's where you stop doing that as well. Here's where you participate, and here's also when you stop participating.
Yeah, yes, exactly. That part is equally as important.
Yeah, and that's the part not everybody gets, because it's the first time they're getting to shout out during a show, and then they don't realize, hey, we don't really want you doing that during the scene, though. The suggestion part is over now.
Yeah. Do you have any tricks for when it's a reticent audience in terms of if you're trying to get a volunteer or something like that? There's something, I think it was Lyle told me, but I didn't know if you had anything in your bag of tricks for that situation.
My number one trick is that I watch the audience closely. I watch the audience more than I watch the show. So even once we're in our first scene or two, I'm always sitting kind of in our new space. I sit right on the edge of the stage where I'm actually looking out at the audience more than I am looking at the scene. And very often I'm kind of calculating who looks like they are having a great time, but maybe they might not be the one to raise their hand, but I can see that they're having a great time and they're really enjoying this.
Yeah.
and they might just be shy. So I can help coerce them if need be. So for me, it's really about making those observations. And just like you would during an improv scene, check in with your partner and make that eye contact to see how they're doing. I do that with the audience throughout the show. I'm kind of constantly looking, going, who really looks like they want to be here? Who are the people that are half engaged? And who are the people that look like they will shut down if we were to put attention on them? And sometimes I get that wrong, but for the most part, I think I'm pretty good about figuring that out.
I feel like it was Lyle, and I could be wrong. It may have been someone else that said this, but this would have been in the theme park arena in terms of if you need to, because Disaster was very volunteer heavy. We needed to get a lot of people from the audience to help us for the rest of the thing. And so that's why like I said, it could have been our show director, but maybe Lyle became our show director after the initial director left after we opened. So someone said that grab the person that's in the loud, like Hawaiian shirt or the really loud shirt, because people that wear things like that want attention. So if you're grabbing the person that in that attire, they should be amenable to being up there and being looked at because that's how they dressed.
That's a great technique because you dress a certain way to get a certain attention on you, right? And if you're dressed in kind of let me try to blend in with the world, you're probably not someone who wants to get up and be crazy.
Yeah, I think I utilized it once or twice.
Yeah. It's a good technique. I always tell people, too, though, one of the best ways to get people to play along with you when they don't want to is just to have a moment to make eye contact, smile, and have a conversation with them before you do it. Because sometimes we'll have a show where we're like, all right, who wants to come up? And you get nothing, right? So my technique is usually to walk out into the audience, walk with them, make eye contact with someone, go, oh, hi, how are you? Oh, I'm fine. Where are you from? Oh, I'm here from New York. Oh, great. I'm also from New York. That's awesome. It's so nice to meet you. Hey, do you want to come up and help us? So I'll invest that extra 30 seconds or so to make it conversational, because I think the more human we seem to that audience, the more likely they are to go, oh, okay, I'm going to connect now with another person versus I'm going to be pulled on stage and have to be looked at.
Yeah. Well, and that's so smart because you meet them out there in the audience, so they're not immediately feeling like all eyes are on them, and then you have that moment with them, and that allows them to then feel like they have an advocate in you up there as well, so they're no longer up there alone. There's so much that's so smart about that.
Yeah, and it turns you into like a partner for them versus an adversary for them, right? Because sometimes that does feel that way, like where these people who are on the stage literally looking down on you. But now it's here. I'm among you. I'm with you. I'm holding out my hand to you, and I'm right there next to you if you need it. Because I'm Rob. I'm a guy, right? I'm just this guy who's talking to you. I'm not actor on stage.
Yeah, and I think that's talking about how it's different. I think some of the expectations people have, if they've only ever seen stand-up, for instance, is that you're looking for someone to pick on, and then they shut down because they don't want to be that person that gets picked on, especially up there.
Right.
And when you have that real human moment with them, they realize it's not about getting picked on, it's about something else.
Yeah, it's about celebrating you versus making you feel stupid.
Exactly.
I don't want anyone to leave any show I'm in feeling stupid. I want them to feel celebrated.
Yeah, for sure. That's it for part 1 of Improv Autopsy with Rob Ward. In part 2, I'll run him through my Proustian questionnaire, among other things. You don't want to miss it. Check out the show notes for links, and if you'd like to be interviewed or know someone else who should be, send me a message at improvbrain@gmail.com. Thanks for listening to Improv Autopsy.